I used to be a big sci-fi fan in my teens, especially the darker films of the 1970s, THX 1138, Soylent Green, Clockwork Orange, Solaris, the list goes on. The thing is, back then, the Illuminati were practically giving away their game plan. Few even noticed, and less even cared. By the 80s, a syndicate of highly influential directors and producers piled into the genre with high-budget, low-brow flicks aimed at the kids. Science fiction was over-commercialized, and from then on merchandising made the bulk of the profits. Besides a few rare exceptions, such as They Live and Brazil, most of the money hightailed to the mainstream. Instead of conspiracy and global corporate tyranny, sci-fi was repackaged for comic book heroes, space westerns, and cutesy aliens. The establishment have carried out almost every piece of mundane predictive programming science fiction has to offer, including global communications, DNA research, lasers, smartphones, robots, electric cars, AI, etc. But the rest was a tease. It's not that the elites don't possess teleportation and time travel technology, they just don't want the apes to get their hands on it. If there was a way of getting out of here alive, they'll make sure you don't find it. Where's here? It's the center, the middle earth of the material plane, an inescapable prison fortified by a vast ice wall perimeter. We live in an asylum run by lunatics, our keepers mostly scorned and shunned by the rest of the world, the rest being the continents beyond the reach of our own, the place where the elite must hide when things fall apart. The skies are always grey now. You know they're terraforming this place. Who knows, it might start raining and never stop. That seems to be a favourite sci-fi trope. Polluted skies, acid rain, flying cars and holographic billboards. It's their dream, not ours. They sell it to us because the elites cannot do what we do as a race. We envision reality. We make our hopes and fears come true, although mostly the latter. Sci-fi programming is nothing more than future-proofing the elites from the wrath of our collective imagination. I used to be able to predict the future. Sometime in 2014 or 2015, I began droning on at my wife about the year 2020. I was convinced there was something malevolent on the horizon. I'd probably let that idea roll around my head for years before I'd even bothered mentioning it. It's not something people want to hear. But I could see the Illuminati gag, 2020, perfect vision. It wasn't something the NWO could possibly resist. Here's the most recent insight I've had on the future, and even this is a few years old now. In a particularly lucid dream, I had a brief discussion with a couple who claimed to be from the future. They insisted that I had travelled forward to meet them, not too far, judging by the look of the place, but enough to make a difference. They had little to say, but instead showed me around their home. The place looked like a large plastic tent, grey, with no doors or windows. It was square at the sides and about 10 feet in height. It was filled with different sized boxes, all wrapped in the same material. They called it grey furniture, and with a flick of a hand, the place burst into colour and sharpened in texture, with familiar materials and objects all round. There was furniture, potted plants, window panes, and even daylight. The couple boasted that it was all AI-generated imagery, holographically emitted through some kind of flexible photonic material. They asked me what I thought of the future. I told them I hated it. Then I woke up. As for the grey agenda, I've had several different experiences, but even now I'm still sitting on the fence. The most concrete was a chance sighting of a low-flying TR-3B, escorted by 2 Harriers, or maybe Eurofighters. They were literally hovering over the town with very few lights on show. I called my wife over to see, and we watched as they glided by the church steeple. The black triangular TR-3B tilted for a moment and revealed its iconic trio of red lights and a bright white centre. We never heard a sonic boom. The whole event was almost silent, aside from a slight rush of air. Then they continued to drift, before slowly climbing out of sight. Some decades before that, I was briefly staying at my mother's house, situated on the Essex-Suffolk border. Every night after the family were asleep, I'd sit outside on the doorstep and have a smoke. Nothing ever happened for months. The sound of crickets, the odd bat, an owl hoot. We're talking about the middle of nowhere here. There were barely a dozen houses spread over a few square miles, no streetlights, unmade roads, and everybody went to bed by 11. Country ways, I guess. There I was, sitting on my step, drinking my tea and having a puff, when I could hear something in the distance, the faint sounds of music echoing in a neighbouring field. I stood up and wandered along the gravel road. I could see beyond a line of yew trees, a bright glow shining through the branches. It dimmed and pulsated, winding down through the colour spectrum. The music became louder and louder. It was highly syncopated and complex. By now I was getting excited. Crazy music means illegal festival. I began to run up the road. The music stopped. The night turned black, and I was almost back home, facing the other way with lit cigarettes still in hand. I must have been transported over a quarter of a mile. After that, I felt cold and sick. I crashed out on my bed and tried to forget about the experience. A few days later, a local free paper popped through the door. I was so bored, I sat down and read it. The headlines mentioned mass UFO sightings involving at least a dozen people in the local area. Some had even taken footage of bright lights darting through the sky. I guess, whatever was going on that night, I wasn't invited to the party after all. The next experience feels like a manipulated dream. It just wasn't my style. Too visceral, too obvious. An abduction scene, floating up, bright light, and there I am in a ship of some kind. I'm faced by two greys, and my immediate instinct is to fight them, and I do. But there's no blood, no gore, just crumpled black plastic eyes and shredded rubber. They were hollow, straw men, scarecrows in costume. I'd had too much experience with the jinn to let anything hijack my dreams. I knew then that the greys were merely low-grade jinn, working alongside organisational powers. The military, the corporate inner sanctum, you name it. I have astral projected into corporate boardrooms and seen them carry out all sorts of insane rituals. They summon success and cast out failure. They and their masters are chameleons of cultural change, playing both sides forever. When religion failed, science rose out of its ashes, turning demons into aliens and the heavens into space stations. Some weeks after my lucid dream experience with the so-called greys, I found myself trapped in a nightmare. I was sat in a dark room, sitting at the end of a brightly lit table. I knew I could leave. I could even make myself wake up if I have to, but I was intrigued. On the other side of the table sat three uniformed men. They sounded American. Judging by the uniforms, they appeared to be high-ranking military types. They interrogated me all night. I could tell they were getting frustrated. They kept demanding that I reveal my agenda, my plan of action, my allegiances. The funny thing is I have none of those. I'm only here to guide a friend and lover home. I truly do not belong in this place. I am a stowaway. Sci-fi used to be my escape. It was a distraction from family arguments and drunken tears before bedtime. Back then, the idea of the future still inspired hope in me. Eventually, I gave up on futuristic fantasies. I'd learned too much too early on. I couldn't deal with any more disappointment. What I knew then as a child, I know now. It is a stalemate. Humans have built their own prison and elected their own torturers. They cheered on as technology surpassed their own capabilities, and now they have made themselves redundant. Good work, human race. Maybe we should dig our own graves while we're at it. The consumer has one last product to consume, and that is themselves. We, the human race, are our own worst enemy. We hand over our fragile hopes and dreams and absorb the guilt of our oppressors. Many of us would rather believe the lies, the broken promises, or at least pretend to. If you want more than survival, if you want to reclaim your true destiny, break your sci-fi programming, flush both red and blue pills down the toilet, and think for yourself.